Interviewing Tom Whitmore of MUFON once again. And Tom, I was anxious to talk with you today because I'm trying to make sense of the sudden government reversal that they are now confirming that UFO sightings are real, are actual, they exist after 75 years of poo-pooing it. Now they're not saying what they are, but they are saying that they are genuine. Why the turnaround, and what do you make of this?
It's been a while coming, Larry, and thank you for having me today. I'm glad to be here. It's been coming over a 3-year period when the To the Stars Academy with Tom DeLonge and Louis Elizondo, Chris Mellon, and others had been working behind the scenes with journalists like Ralph Blumenthal and Leslie Kean, who came out with this article in the New York Times in December 2017. And after that, there was a lot of work going on at the congressional level, particularly by the efforts of Chris Mellon and Louis Elizondo. And they arranged for these pilots who had seen these objects while they were in the Navy to testify before the Senate, either the staffers or the senators themselves in the Senate Intelligence Committee. And this led to this request that the Senate Intelligence Committee wrote up, particularly by Senator Rubio, requesting a report in 180 days. So once that, it's not actually legislation, but it passed through, I think, an omnibus spending bill that came out in late December, right around Christmas time. And the request involved a report in 180 days, which will be June 25 of this year. So I think what's happening is it's possible that some people have been lobbying the press. For example, certain people could be calling, up the New York Times or 60 Minutes or whoever, and asking them to cover this story. Now, as we get closer and closer to this deadline in June 25, the press has picked up on the story. And now I'm not a journalist, but they tend to act in a sort of a herd mentality from time to time. Once the ball gets rolling, then everybody wants to get into the act. And so now you've had not only New York Times and Politico, but other journalistic institutions and 60 Minutes. And so now we have real momentum. At the same time, certain people have been leaking videos and photographs to certain people in the UFO community. There's been a photograph of what appeared to be a balloon. Then there was a video of an object that appeared to go in the hover over the water and went into the water. And then I think just yesterday or the day before, we had a video of a radar reading. So we have a combination of one, certain people contacting journalists, I think, to get the story covered. Two, we have momentum, a snowballing effect with the media. And three, we have people leaking information.
Tom, I understand what you're saying, but my question still is that the government has been controlling it very tightly all these years. Even if pilots sometimes leak information, people come forward. They've always, been firm in saying, no, it's a weather balloon, it's swamp gas, it's this, it's that. And secondly, they've had the military under their thumb in terms of national security disclosures. So all of a sudden, it's all opening up now. And I just can't really make any logical sense of this where it's like a 180-degree turnaround. I mean, they could still be telling their military people to keep their mouths shut under threat of whatever they could be punished by, and they could still have the official line that it's all an illusion, it's all hoaxes, blah, blah, blah. But yet that seems to be pushed aside now. And again, how come?
There are some possibilities there. For example, Chris Mellon, who's been instrumental in this, has worked on both sides. He's worked in both DOD and on the congressional side. And perhaps Mellon and/or Elizondo had convinced the Navy to make it okay for pilots and personnel to report their experiences. Now, it's also been reported that there has been an awful lot of activity in these Navy exercises within what they consider to be restricted airspace. Of course, the UFOs or the UAPs, whatever you want to call them, they don't see it that way. And there's been enough activity that I think some people are getting tired of having to keep their mouths shut, and they want to report this. Now, my personal impression there is that the government is not voluntarily coming out with any information. Anything that they've admitted or that they've agreed to up to this point is on the DOD side is because they've been forced to. It's like pulling teeth, and I don't see on the DOD side people coming forthcoming with information at all. Now, the very latest I've heard through social media is that with this radar video that came out, that it's actually all over the government. So they can't hide it at this point.
And there has been an increase in sightings, at least an increase in reports of sightings or a release of these reports. Is there any pattern to the increase? Now, we've had fluctuations over the decades, an increase in sightings and a drop off and an increase. What do you make of this? Is this some kind of a pattern that has any kind of a meaning?
Well, there's the civilian side and there's the military side. And the reason why we're seeing this activity now in the media is because of what had been going on in the military side. And I think there has definitely been an uptick in these military sightings, particularly the Navy. Now, on the civilian side, there's an ebb and flow to that. There tend to be more sightings in summer when people are outside. There tend to be more sightings in the evenings when people go out and walk their dogs or go out for a smoke. That kind of a thing. I don't know that there's any particularly larger quantity of sightings on the civilian side right now, even though, excuse me, even though with all the excitement, people are going to tend to want to pay more attention and maybe report more sightings. But definitely the change has been on the military side. Now, when I say that, I mean the Navy. And if you notice, the Air Force has not said one thing in all of this. And the word on the street is that in this report that's supposed to be coming out, that the Air Force has been stonewalling.
Is there a national security threat to the government's apparent inability to understand what these objects are?
Depending on the level of activity and the type of activity, if the objects are not close to our hardware, to our equipment, the brass may not see it as much as a threat. But there have been instances where these objects have come very close to our jets, very close enough that I think some people have been concerned about the safety aspects of it. So I think in that respect, it could be considered a threat.
There were also reports some years ago of UFOs hovering outside nuclear missile bases and shutting down the launch codes, et cetera. Is there any credibility to that?
There have been reports, there have been military personnel that have verified some instances like that. And at the time, they were told not to talk about it, but when they came out later and discussed it, there wasn't any retribution there. Now, there's also a possibility in some of these northern tier events with the nuclear missiles that maybe some kind of tests were being conducted, security tests. I think we have to hold out that possibility too. But it's become the conventional wisdom in the UFO community that there is this interest by whoever these groups are, that they have an interest in our nuclear weapons.
This is also a global phenomenon, is it not? I mean, it's been reported by Russians and other countries as well, similar incidents, similar sightings, correct?
Oh, yes, there's a long history of activity in Russia. There's a history of NATO pilots seeing UFOs in Europe. I think Gordon Cooper is one of those people. There's a history of these triangular objects being sighted in Belgium. There's been a lot of activity in England. There's the famous Rendlesham Forest
Right.
case in England. And then there's been a whole long history of activity in South America. There's been the incident that occurred in Africa with the school children, and many incidents in Australia. Now, we do hear things from time to time about China, but we don't know as much about that.
Yeah. It's also, there seems to be now a connection between UFOs and oceans and water. UFOs reportedly emerging from watery bodies and submerging into them, into oceans, into large lakes even. What do you make of that connection?
Luis Elizondo has mentioned that quite a bit, and I think one of the things that has impressed him and people that he's worked with is that these objects, they have the capability of being in space, of flying in the air, and of going into the water. And they've been reported to travel as fast as 100 knots underwater. So that's one thing, but actually the idea of UFOs being underwater is not new. There's a history of that as well. In fact, one of the people on the MUFON board, Debbie Ziegelmeyer, is interested in that. And she's followed that very closely too.
Is
But
that
yes, yeah,
is that why there's so many sightings connected with the Navy?
there's been a lot of activity on the Southern California coast, especially in the vicinity of Catalina Island. And then there's been activity off the Virginia coast on the Atlantic side too. So yes, it's definitely connected with the Navy.
There's even speculation that the bit with the water is they have underwater bases where they're hiding underwater. What do you make of that?
Well, there have been rumors for years that there have been underground bases, that people have seen UFOs going into mountains. They've seen UFOs coming in and out of the water, that maybe there are underwater bases. So this hasn't been verified, but we have reason to suspect that maybe that's possible.
I should ask you before we go further. What is your reading on Elizondo? Do you find him credible?
I do. I think he's sincere. I think he's a good man. I think he's doing the best he can. I think that he's brave. He is getting some legal assistance from Daniel Sheehan, who is a well-known public affairs attorney. And he and Daniel Sheehan have filed a complaint with the DOD Inspector General. And there are some issues there because the DOD has come out and contradicted that Elizondo was running ATIP or had anything to do with ATIP. And Elizondo's been very concerned, very offended with that. So they're actually they're trying to take some legal action here.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. Elizondo speculation that he was running what?
Well, the DOD has been coming out with contradictory statements about Elizondo. They have said that he had no assigned responsibilities with ATIP,
Right.
and they've generally given the impression that they're not willing to verify that he's been associated with the ATIP efforts.
Yeah.
And Elizondo vehemently denies, that the DOD has been correct in those assertions.
Why hasn't he been silenced one way or another?
I think that he and Chris Mellon I like to say that they've checkmated the Department of Defense by going through the Congress and by going through the Senate. Now, the Senate's request is not legislation. it is merely a request. But I think you'd probably agree, Larry, that when powerful senators make a request of the Department of Defense, that there's an implied threat there, okay? Because the Congress has the power of the purse. So perhaps, the Department of Defense got right on it after that was passed, and they formed this UAP task force. So that shows right there that at least there's a modicum of sincerity and interest in complying with the Senate's request.
Now, another big question that I have, and I think a lot of other people have who follow this over the years, who follow the denials of the government, is that will this report really tell us what's actually going on? Will it be factual, or will it be limited in facts, or even devoid of the real facts and another cover-up?
Yes, and we'll just have to wait and see. I've heard both sides. I've heard that the Air Force is stonewalling. Luis Elizondo himself has said that certain departments have claimed they haven't even received requests for information. But then another source has said that we're going to get more, there's going to be more in that report than we expect. So we'll just have to wait and see. But I would expect that some of the information is going to be unclassified or declassified that the public can see. And some of it, probably the best information, is going to be classified, and that'll be disclosed to the congressional committees in private.
And what would that lead to? Will the congressional committees keep it bottled up, or will the public begin to learn at least the partial truth about what's out there?
We might learn something because the Congress has a reputation of leaking like a sieve.
Yeah.
So who knows, maybe we'll get leaks.
Tom, if the reported sightings are accurate in terms of the speed, maneuverability, the sharp turns, et cetera, it would seem beyond the known law of physics. Now, does that mean that these craft exceed the speed of light or are interdimensional? In other words, how could they traverse the vast distances, even to the nearest star? It has to be some other kind of propulsion that we don't know about, or perhaps do know about but haven't disclosed. But I mean, it'd be a whole new era of physical laws, would it not? Physical laws that at least the general public is unaware of.
Yes, it's got to be something beyond anything that we understand at this point, at least publicly. And if there is any understanding of it, it's in some kind of a black program, that's withheld from the public knowledge at this point. But yes, but these characteristics, the right angle turns, the extreme high speeds, and all of these things, this has been going on since the beginning, since World War II.
Right.
And those characteristics are nothing new. And for those of us who take this seriously and believe that there's something to it, then that implies that they have a technology that is way beyond anything that we understand.
Now that begs the question, is it alien technology, or is it something that we actually possess but the public doesn't know about? Are we capable of that kind of technology, or is there no way of knowing at this point?
It all depends on whether any UFOs have been recovered, Larry. And we go back to the alleged Roswell incident, right, and rumors and reports of other UFO recoveries. Now, that's basically a yes or no question. Either they have recovered one or more UFOs, or they haven't. If they have, it's possible that over the years, maybe some progress has been made, and maybe in secret, some craft have been able to develop that have at least some of these characteristics. Now, if they haven't recovered any UFOs, then I think it's very unlikely that we would have technology on that level.
Would it be our technology that we've reverse engineered, so to speak, or might another nation or other nations have it, the Russians, the Chinese, whatever?
I think it's probably true that we love to know what the Russians know about UFOs, and they love to know what we know about UFOs. But there had been reports and rumors over many years that the Russians not only have had UFO activity, but they may have recovered one or more themselves. We just don't know, because all of that is, if it's true, it's all kept so secret. We can't get to it.
Yeah, there's also been indications that, well, not just indications, but public statements by the Russians. They seem to be much more willing to release more information than our military, correct? I mean, they've had officials that are citing incidents and seemingly giving it at least some credence that we haven't been getting from our military.
I think that may be true, except that in the Soviet Union, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, the Soviet government, they had complete control over the press. And I don't think they reported on UFOs to the public in the kind of scenario that we had in the US in the 50s and 60s. And during the 50s and 60s, I think the Air Force became thoroughly sick of dealing with UFOs on a public level. And they did eventually find a way to shut down the whole UFO controversy publicly through the so-called Condon Report with the University of Colorado at the end of the 1960s, and they shut down Blue Book. And the Air Force is absolutely, I think, opposed to even discussing this subject.
You know, if the military is secretly convinced that these things exist and that they are intelligently controlled, wouldn't there be some kind of indication over the years that the military is actually very alarmed about the situation, is trying to develop techniques to control it, combat it, or whatever, instead of just ignoring it and hoping that it goes away? Would there be an effort that we get some inkling of that the military was addressing it seriously?
Yes, and the inkling that I get is from the testimony of former AFOSI Special Agent Richard Doty, and he's pointed out, and it's not inconceivable, that the Air Force Office of Special Investigations does check into these incidents when they affect Air Force bases or Air Force personnel or Air Force equipment. And I think it's safe to presume that the other military investigative branches like the Navy do the same thing. So if you have a UFO land on a runway at an Air Force base that keeps a jet from taking off, then that's something that they're going to be concerned about. But they're not necessarily going to disclose it publicly or discuss it publicly.
What you just mentioned, was that an actual report of an incident like that?
Richard Doty mentioned an incident at Nellis Air Force Base where a UFO was sitting on the runway. Now, I haven't been able to verify that, but that's an example of the kind of thing that obviously the military would be concerned with.
Now, Tom, you've been active in this for years, and you process, compile, and analyze all kinds of reports from civilians. What is your personal view? Is this technology ours? Is it alien? And if it is alien, why are they here? What are they up to? Are they intelligently controlled craft from intelligent alien beings? What is your personal opinion from the perspective of a MUFON official who's been exposed to all kinds of reports over the years?
Well, anything that I would say, Larry, is my personal opinion. It's not appropriate for me to speak officially from MUFON's position. But for the generation that I come from the 50s and 60s, I think that we're most comfortable with the extraterrestrial explanation. And there have been rumors and reports that, because of the Roswell recoveries and other recoveries, that contact has been made with one or more extraterrestrial groups. Now, if we look at the history of all of this, it's apparent that there is more than one group involved. There are several types of entity, at least several types of entities that have been reported. So personally, I'm most comfortable with the extraterrestrial idea. But then there are other theories too, that they could be time travelers, that they could be interdimensional, that they could be what I call intraterrestrial. That is, they actually exist here on Earth, maybe in these underground or underwater bases, and they've been here for a very long time. And we just don't know the answer to that question yet, Larry.
Are they a threat? What are they up to? Why are they here?
One idea is that if they are extraterrestrial, and if they've been here for a very long time, we're talking thousands, if not millions of years, then they're treating the Earth as kind of their aquarium, their terrarium, because the Earth is teeming with life, and the Earth is very suitable for life. So there's a possibility that maybe they've been experimenting over a very long period of time, and that's why they're here.
Experimenting in what sense? With us? With other creatures? What?
Both. And there has been this notion that our own evolution has been managed. It's been affected. Now, I'm not saying that it has, and I don't necessarily believe that it has, but that is one possible explanation as to why they're here and what they've been doing.
There's a school of thought that if these are advanced, intelligent alien beings, so far advanced in terms of their own evolution, technology, and all that, that they would be by nature benevolence, not malevolence. What do you think?
We seem to have both. If there are several groups, there may be one or more that are benevolent. There may be one or more that are basically neutral, and there may be one or more that are negative. And it's kind of like it's kind of like human nature too. Some people are good, some people are bad, some people are indifferent. And I think it could possibly be that way with these so-called aliens.
Well, that would seem to indicate that if there's some that are bad out there, that the government has already found a way to contain it or deal with it or have some kind of a treaty, as have been reported, nothing confirmed. But in other words, if there are advanced alien beings here that have ill intent, then the government must be alarmed about that and trying to take measures to contain that threat, wouldn't you say?
Elizondo has complained that there's a faction in the Defense Department, at the highest levels, that some of these folks believe that they're demonic, that the ET or the aliens are demonic in origin. And there's also been an interesting book written about that by Nick Redfern. It's called Final Events. Do they have any way to do they have countermeasures against these aliens, assuming they exist? I don't know. It doesn't seem like they do, because we keep getting UFO reports. We keep getting UFOs harassing the Navy. We keep getting abduction reports and so on and so forth. So it just seems to keep going on.
What would they mean by demonic?
That seems to originate with a conservative or evangelical Christian attitude, that they come from the devil. And I can't really follow that logic very well myself. I don't follow that logic very well, and I don't agree with it. But this field is so wide open, Larry, that almost anything is possible.
Well, some of the thinking, I think, along the lines of demonic is that it comes from biblical revelations that what some people refer to as fallen angels were actually demonic alien beings. Demonic in the sense that they had ill intent towards earthlings. So therefore, we would characterize them as demons, although it's not in the strict sense of angels and demons. Have you heard anything like that?
There's the idea that these groups originate interdimensionally. So maybe there's another dimension where uh, what we would call demons exist. The problem that I see with that is that these craft are physical. So there's got to be some interaction, with these entities running physical craft. And maybe you go from one dimension to another, or maybe the craft enables you to do that. I don't know.
Yeah, well, the public seems more and more on board with the idea that aliens do exist and they're on Earth here. Um, what about the concern, the assumed concern of the government over all the years that if they disclose too much, it's going to be a worldwide panic?
Yes, and that's if there's truth to this idea that we're being visited by either extraterrestrials or entities that we don't understand. And yes, that's a big problem. It really is a big problem. In fact, at this moment, I would say that the Department of Defense is perilously close to losing control of this conversation. And if enough journalists, enough investigators, some very good investigative journalists, if they can get some people to go on the record and verify that this really is true, it's possible that it could break open. But in terms of on the government side, voluntarily disclosing, I give that a very low probability.
Well, in that perspective, then the government may have been correct in all these years in containing it, but otherwise there will be a very chaotic situation, panic in the streets, et cetera, et cetera. So there is some validity to that reasoning of non-disclosure, is there not?
Yes, especially if the information is negative. Uh, a lot of people in the UFO community, they want to know the truth. I want to know the truth. We all want to know the truth, but you also have to be careful what you ask for, because what if you don't like the answer that you get? That could be a big problem.
So, Tom, where do you think all this is leading to now? Is it going to lead to disclosure or enough disclosure to create the kind of situation that could be negative for globally? Or is it, if the truth is out there and we know it, will that actually have a mollifying effect? Or is that, totally unknown at this point? And what's your prediction on where all this is going? Will it again be contained with a limited hangout, or will it break wide open? The probability of that.
I think the people that have been pushing for more information will continue to do so. I'm thinking that the amount of information that's released on the DoD side is directly proportional to the amount of pressure that the press and the journalistic community and ultimately the political community puts on them. However, I do think that anything they do disclose publicly will be a limited hangout, and they will try to ride this out. There have got to be people in the Pentagon right now thinking very hard about how they can slow all this down, and hope that the news cycle gets to a point to where maybe this is all put aside and they can go back to doing business the way they normally do.
There's been some speculation that the government has been controlling the image of aliens. And there have been a number of movies in recent years, Independence Day, et cetera, which is a reversal from the Steven Spielberg thing of E.T., who was benevolent and kind and warm, switching the image of that, the public perception of it, into something that's hostile and very dangerous and evil. Do you see any government hand in the way the media imagery of aliens is being depicted?
Not necessarily, Larry, because in the 50s and the 60s, with a lot of the science fiction movies, the outer space beings were presented as very threatening, very frightening. The Steven Spielberg angle on Close Encounters of the Third Kind, I would say, is the exception rather than the rule. Think about the movie Alien and think about how frightening that creature is.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think, I don't think the CIA and or the Air Force necessarily deliberately direct the direction of the perceptions from Hollywood, but what they do is they try to make sure that they don't look bad. So, and they do have offices in Hollywood where they work with these film development companies, and they want to be presented in a positive light, and they don't want to look bad.
You know, I've asked you this question in our last interview, and I'll ask you again, even though to many people, and perhaps even to yourself, it seems, totally off the wall. But I know you've heard of it with Werner von Braun. Before he died, he was talking to an associate, and he told her, supposedly, that the government was going to create a number of hoaxes, of crises, in order to usher in gradually world government. And among those crises would be the threat with communism and the Russians. And then after that, it would be terrorism. And then the final hoax, in order to bring about world government, to get everybody to unite out of fear, the final hoax would be, by the government, would be a staged fake alien invasion of the earth. What's your take on that?
I don't know if we have enough information to know for sure that Werner von Braun actually said that, but I've got a lot of problems with this whole false flag scenario about aliens. I mean, if you think about it, how could they really do that? Would they have to present this worldwide? And you talk about the problems of a panic, and social control and all that. I mean, you'd really have some problems then. And is there really a capability to present that on a level that it would convince the population of the world that this is really happening, when in fact it's false? It's a put on, it's a hoax. The false flag events, if we look at American history, there have been false flag events, but they've been on a much smaller scale than that. So I just don't buy into this false flag theory.
Well, Tom Whitmore of MUFON, thanks once again for being with us. And we'll be talking again as the government finally comes out this June. Would you say June 25th, is it, or 26th?
Yes. Yeah,
with the report. And I'll be anxious to talk with you again to see what that report says and what it actually indicates. Tom Whitmore, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Larry.